So let's talk about Genesis. Right in the opening chapters, just before you get to Noah and the flood, there are these 4 really strange verses, and they've kicked up centuries of debate. We're talking about a passage with sons of God, daughters of man, and this mysterious group called the Nephilim. To figure out what's really going on here, we're going to have to decode this thing, piece by piece. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to dive right into the mystery itself, looking at the actual text from Genesis. Then we'll decode the key players, figure out who's who by digging into the original Hebrew. We'll also take a hard look at a popular alternative theory to see if it actually holds up. After that, we'll trace the legacy of these giants after the flood. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see what the story is really about, a tale of cosmic disorder. All right, let's jump in. Section 1, an ancient biblical mystery. To get to the bottom of this, we have to start right at the source of all the confusion. Those controversial opening verses of Genesis, chapter 6. Right off the bat, the text hits us with 2 huge questions that have been bugging people for, millennia. Who were these sons of God, and what in the world were the Nephilim? Okay, here's the passage itself. The language is pretty stark, right? It's direct, it describes this union between the sons of God and human women, and the result? Offspring who became legendary, the mighty men who were of old. So you can tell this isn't just a simple family tree note. The text is screaming that something deeply unnatural is happening here. Now, you'd think the problem here is a lack of data, right? That we just don't have enough information. But actually, the real issue is the opposite. It's an abundance of later assumptions that have been piled on top of the text. For centuries, interpreters who were frankly uncomfortable with how strange this passage is have tried to explain it away. Our job today is to peel back all those layers and see what the text was actually saying in its original context. Okay, that brings us to section 2, decoding the key players. And to do this, we've got to put on our linguistic detective hats. We're going to examine the crucial clues that are locked away in the original Hebrew terms. So the key phrase here is bene hāʻelohim, which translates to sons of God. And what's really remarkable is how consistent it is. Just look at the chart. Every single other time this exact phrase shows up in the Hebrew Bible, we're talking in Job, in the Psalms, it always refers to divine, heavenly beings who are part of God's celestial court. There's just no good textual reason to think it suddenly means something totally different here in Genesis. So this is the crucial point, right? The story isn't just about good people marrying bad people. It's about what scholars call an ontological domain violation. That's a fancy way of saying beings from one realm of existence, the spiritual heavenly court, are improperly crossing over into another, the human world. This isn't just a moral slip-up. It's an act that fundamentally disrupts the cosmic order. It's a huge deal. Okay, so what about the Nephilim themselves? The common translation you hear is the fallen ones, but honestly, linguistically, that's a pretty weak argument. Aramaic cognates actually point to a much more unsettling meaning, something like malformed giants or even corruptors. And that fits the narrative perfectly, doesn't it? They weren't just the passive result of this union, they were active agents of chaos. And the descriptions don't even stop there. The text calls them gibbôrîm, or mighty men. But you have to understand, in the ancient world, that term brought up images of tyrannical strong men, violent giant heroes, and men of renown. In Hebrew, it's men of the name, which doesn't mean they were famous heroes. It means they were infamous, notorious. These are not the good guys of the story. They were absolutely the villain. So, if the text itself seems to be pointing so clearly to heavenly beings, what about all the other interpretations? Well, that brings us to section 3. We're going to examine the most popular alternative theory out there, the Sethite view. This timeline here really tells the story. It shows this major shift in how people understood the passage. For the first several centuries, pretty much everyone, both Jewish and early Christian interpreters, agreed this story was about divine beings. It wasn't until around 221 AD that a scholar named Julius Africanus, who was clearly uncomfortable with the theology, first suggested that maybe the sons of God were actually just the human descendants of Seth, marrying the descendants of Cain. Then Augustine later popularized that view, but it's so important to see that this is a reinterpretation. It came centuries after the text was written. And you know what? When you actually hold this Sethite view up against the text, it really struggles. First off, the Bible never calls them sons of Seth. It's just not there. Second, it does nothing to explain where these giant corrupting offspring, the Nephilim, came from.
And maybe most importantly, does a story about mixed marriages between family lines really justify a judgment as catastrophic as a world-ending flood? It just doesn't match the scale of the disaster or the very specific divine language the author chose to use.
All right, on to section 4, legacy of the giants. Now, you might think this whole crazy story ends with the flood, but it doesn't. Not really. The memory of these powerful, corrupting figures echoes throughout the rest of the Bible.
Because after the flood, we see the emergence of other giant clans. You've got the Anakim, the Rephaim, and think about it, Goliath, the famous giant from Gath. These figures are consistently shown as enemies of Israel, as obstacles to God's plan. So the theme of these giant-like figures representing a threat to divine order, it just keeps going. And hey, remember that word gibbor? That Hebrew term for a mighty one, a strong man, the one associated with dominance and force. Well, the biblical authors are about to use it again to make a really, really powerful connection.
Get this. Nimrod, the first great tyrant after the flood, the ruler who built the Tower of Babel, is also called a gibbor. This is brilliant on the author's part. They're using the exact same term to link the tyrannical power structures popping up after the flood right back to the original primeval corruption of the Nephilim's world. And this all brings us to our final section, a story of cosmic disorder. So, after all this, why does any of it matter? What is the ultimate theological point of this strange ancient story? Well, here's the core idea. The flood story isn't just about how bad humans got. It's about a divine rebellion that basically poured gasoline on the fire of human sin. And that toxic combination created a level of cosmic chaos so profound that the world became, in a very real sense, irreparably broken. This cosmic-level rebellion is presented as the #1 reason why evil reached a point of no return. The problem was just that big. It was this hybrid of human and spiritual corruption. So the solution had to be equally drastic. It required a complete reset of creation. This quote here just sums it up perfectly. The Nephilim episode shows us that the biblical understanding of evil isn't just about individual bad choices or social problems. It's cosmic. And if the problem is cosmic in scale, then the solution can't just be try to be a better person. It requires divine intervention. And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. If the problem that led to the Bible's first great judgment wasn't just human sin, but a full-blown cosmic rebellion, how does that change the way we read the entire story of redemption that follows? It's a question that kind of changes everything. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown.